Hi, I'm Tim Jackson. Welcome to what we're now calling Behind the Screen from the Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline, Massachusetts, discussing The Class by Laurent Conté with Jean-Dominique Sifontus, who's been here a lot lately.
Yeah.
But we see these films together. You're French. This is a French film, an amazing French film,
Yeah.
um, about a classroom, an inner city classroom in, is it in Paris?
Yeah,
Where's-
Paris.
Yeah.
But really, the outskirts.
Yeah.
20th arrondissement, that's, pretty outside.
Right. And what you're going to see is not To Sir with Love or even Blackboard Jungle. And you're not seeing a documentary, although you imagine that you are seeing a documentary.
Mm-hmm.
It's shot with all non-professional actors with the feel so much of a documentary that when we saw this, the woman sitting next to me must have been a teacher. She was literally on the edge of her seat, leaning forward, crying, laughing, covering her eyes, gasping.
Yeah, yeah.
So that what you're really getting is such a true vision of what a contemporary classroom is like in the city, and yet it's not real.
Right, right. I only realized at the end that they were actors, but they were not real actors either. And so it was kind of complicated. I thought they actually, except maybe for him, I thought that most people, including the kids, were almost, just like real, that they picked people and sort of, get some kind of storyline and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But actually they were real people. I don't know if I can find a better term.
Yeah, I know. Like there's going to be a new term
Yeah.
for what people are who are
Yeah,
able to be
right.
natural in front of the camera and create a
Yeah.
reality for us. But what you're saying when you say he, you're talking about Francois
Bigodeau.
Bigodeau,
Bigodeau,
who
yeah.
wrote the book on which the film is based,
Right.
and he plays the teacher.
And he actually, I think he also was a teacher or...
He wrote the book, and
Yes.
the way he wrote the book was he just kept journals. He kept journals of his experience in the classroom. That was it, and that was the book. And what they did with the movie was Laurent Conté said, let's use that as a jumping off point for what I want to do with the film, which is to create the ambience and the situations that are true to a classroom.
Yeah,
And
right.
so they jumped off with that and then created this improvisational situation, which, as you were saying earlier, has an arc to it.
Oh,
It's
definitely.
absolutely riveting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, the movie's long. Like, it's 2 hours.
Over two, a couple of minutes over two, yeah.
And I was surprised that, at the end of it, you really get this story, this almost like classical storytelling, with the ups and downs, almost like an arc, and with the ending that just gripping, and then the hope, constantly like you're almost rooting for him and for the kids, and and so it's but everything about the movie when it's put together and the whole scenery, it seems like a jumble of different things. You can't like find any kind of organization throughout the movie, or at least a big part of it.
Yeah, I mean, being a teacher myself, and your wife is a teacher,
Yeah.
this is what a classroom feels like. Fortunately, not in college. We've got a college crew here shooting, and we're all wonderful. I worship you all. But I have been in a high school classroom, and this is so much the feel of that kind of chaos and management that you have to go through.
Oh yeah, right.
How do you engage them
couldn't do it.
when they're, and even the gestures that they made when they put their hands over their heads and the way they lean on the desk and the way they roll their eyes, it's just astounding. So just an insight into what they did was one camera was on the teacher, one camera was on the subject, the student who was actually doing the answering to whatever the teacher was attempting to do, and one camera was always prowling.
All around, yes.
And so I think they caught a lot of prowling to get that classroom ambience.
Now, you know what? The one thing that I was having a hard time is the translation. And it's hard to keep attention to it the whole time, even though it's big. Those subtitles were huge.
Because it's a lot of
But I
fun.
think a lot of it was lost in the translation, including the title. I didn't understand why they translated that from
The French
from
title is
Entre les
Between the
Murs.
Walls or something?
Yeah, between the walls of the class, but actually between the walls and the class. And I thought that's because I thought a big part of the movie is the claustrophobia. You're in this place and this city and this whole surrounding and you look at the small classroom and everything is just very close, in your face, close, and it's almost. I mean, some of the surroundings almost look like a prison.
I'm sure it's meant to be that way.
Right,
Yeah.
and so there's like that claustrophobic sense of it, which I think goes throughout the whole movie, and that's in the title, Entre les Murs. I mean, that's I don't know, maybe they didn't intend it, but
It's probably just a commercial concern, actually. The class is more. People will know more what they're getting than between the walls.
right, no, true.
I'm sure it's just.
But there was
It's a great point.
there's things kind of, and I'm sure it's extremely difficult to translate because you have all these different. Part of it is language. All those kids have different background, different.
What are the
language.
backgrounds of those kids? Because I was asking you in the film, what
Well,
accents are we hearing? Who are the students that? Because they're talking about the ethnicity, the multicultural aspects of certainly in France, which we're not familiar with, but it absolutely translates over in terms of the
definitely.
ethnicity of
And that's
American class.
That's a fairly new thing. I think that's like the post-colonial thing.
It is.
And so you get mainly, I would say Arab, probably North African, from probably Algeria, Morocco, but Algeria, Tunisia mostly. Then you have, some from African countries, and I'm not quite sure which. I can't remember. There was,
And
when
Caribbean
they talk.
too, I assume.
Yeah, but most African, they were talking about that. They're doing this, the talk about soccer, and so there's those.
Well, there's a translation point because you're howling out loud at the discussions of the soccer,
Yes.
and I'm going, "What's the big deal? It's just."
But
Soccer.
it's huge, I mean, that's a thing. It's like it's like the real unifier, soccer. Of the, everybody plays soccer, and it's the big thing, and it's almost like where they can actually talk together.
And so some of the most engaging conversations that happen in the classroom actually end up happening around the opinions of what the students have around
About soccer. And it's a huge deal, which there's not quite such a thing here, but in Europe and all around the world, soccer is the thing.
And I noticed even at the very end of the film, when there's been a lot of tension between the students, between the teachers, and there's a situation about expulsion that becomes a hearing for one of the students. I won't even say how that comes out because that was a real surprise. That's a riveting moment, as you said. But in the end, they're all playing soccer together. The principal,
right,
the teacher, who's a real teacher, and all these semi-professional students are all playing soccer together.
And it's a unifying thing.
Yeah.
You see, that's funny because I mean, those schools they don't look anything, even kind of the teaching style and all that. Anything like I went to school in French, which was in the '60s or high school. But originally the French public system, which is much more unified than in this country, and same curriculum for the whole country, same kind of standards and all that.
In France.
In France, and still now. But when it was first created, like mid-19th century, it was kind of the unifier in French. In the mid-19th century, most of France didn't speak French. A lot of people in kind of the countryside and all that spoke dialects. And public education was the first effort to try to have people speaking one language. So it was like, at the beginning, the intent of public education was the unifying thing. And then by the early 60s, that was pretty much done in France. And then post-colonial war, it's now back to its original intent, unifying all these people, talking different language.
And I noticed that in the film, a lot of what happens early on is English, is teaching French, is teaching language.
Right.
Right? That's a big part of all those early lessons.
Yes.
And everybody's in a different place in the students in regard to how important they seem to take this. How important
right.
it is.
And how
whether the teacher even knows the slang.
Yes.
Whether he even can communicate effectively.
And